We're not talking about the best of them. We're just talking about the rest of them.
Not the worst parts, but the best parts. And the best parts we have. The best of the rest.
Hello, and your levity is good. It relieves tension and the fear of death. Welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It's Terminator month. In this week, we are talking the 2003 film Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my living tissue over living skeleton co-host, Andrew Williams. All right, you ready to talk some Terminator, Andrew?
I am. Been a while since I've gone back to this one, so I'm excited to drop back into it.
Same. It's been a very long time since I've watched this one. I love this franchise, one of my favorite franchises, especially favorite sci-fi franchises. I mean, Terminator 2, top 5 action movie of all time, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people share that opinion. It's just really good stuff. As we go through this month and talk about some of the mixed reception sequels, there's a few of them that I really regularly go to bat for. I think they're kind of gems. But Terminator 3 specifically, if I'm being honest, I think I saw it once, not in theaters. I think at some point, shortly after high school maybe, I kind of really got to the Terminator franchise, knocked all 3 of them out, loved the first 2, and I mean, look, it's a hashtag positivity podcast. We're going to talk about the positives later when we get into it, but I kind of hated this movie. It was definitely a much snobbier film phase for me, but I was definitely someone who'd be like,
Ooh, what?
Watch
snobby film takes from us?
these guys.
Preposterous.
I mean, I probably, would tell people, oh, Terminator franchise is great. Great 2 films. It's too bad they never made another one.
Look at how clever I am.
In fact, whenever I met friend of the show, my wife, my now wife, then girlfriend, you go through that phase where you're like, oh my God, you haven't seen that movie, you got to see this movie, and you kind of trade movie picks back and forth. I assume every couple does that. I don't know. But she had never seen the Terminator franchise, and so we watched the first 2, and we just stopped. Like, I was like, that's all you need to see, and she did enjoy them. She saw some of this one when I was watching it for this podcast, and she was upset that we didn't watch this one. So now I think I gotta go back and watch the whole thing. I'll let you know what scene she saw later when we get into it. But revisiting this movie, for me, there's a lot more that I liked about it than that initial watch. But like I said, initially, not a huge fan. How about you, Andrew? What's your history with this franchise and in this entry specifically?
Now, I'm pretty sure I saw this in theaters. I would have been almost 16 when this came out, so I don't think my parent. I don't remember. Is this one rated R? I can't remember.
Based on the number, I haven't looked it up yet. I will look it up in a second because that's good podcasting. But I was watching the movie thinking the same thing because there's like some kills where they cut away, where I feel like in previous
and I don't
ones
feel like the language is particularly harsh.
There's a lot of S's.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So I'm gonna look it up right now. But what do you think before I look it up? PG-13 or R?
I think PG-13, and I imagine it was a point of contention amongst the fan base because this was the era of they're making everything PG-13 and it's watering everything down because the quality of a film is definitely determined by its rating and not at all its content.
Well, Andrew, despite your mocking of the fan base, it's actually a rated R.
All right.
But I was kind of leaning towards PG-13 too. It feels like it feels like
I'm sure
went
my
for
rant will be
PG-13
true
rating.
for one of the future films. I'm sure I will get to do that.
I'll just copy and paste it whenever it becomes relevant.
Exactly. But so in that case, I still feel like I saw it in theaters. My brother is a huge, huge Terminator fan. I don't think there is a single film in this franchise that he has not, in the moment it came out, defended immensely. I think now he's kind of a little bit more softened on what's the good and what's the bad, but this was his jam for a long time. So when the new one came out, I'm pretty sure we were there opening weekend, taking in this one. And I've seen it a few times over the years. I think my mom really likes this one.
Of course. It's been a while since we had one of Andrew's mom's picks on this podcast.
I'm pretty sure this is one of her picks. But so like we owned it, and it would be, that kind of thing. Or if it were on TV, my family wouldn't be opposed to just kind of being like, oh, check this out or watch this. So it's always been around. But, since I moved out of my parents' house, 17, 18 years ago, I haven't gone back to it very much. It's not something I've sought out. I don't know if I've watched it since then. Even with like the new sequels that came out later, I don't think I ever went back to this one. And so, yeah, that's kind of my history. Like a Terminator, like I said, it was a big thing in my house, like between my brother and like my dad. I'm obviously a big fan of the first two films. Everybody, sci-fi fans, James Cameron fans, everybody. The we don't need to talk about how well received Terminator and T2 are, but yeah, just like I said, no, it was around when I was a kid. Pretty sure I saw it in theaters, but have not gone back to it. Probably well over 10 years at this point, if not much longer. Just because, I feel like I had similar thoughts. Like when I saw it the first time, I was probably like, oh, it was all right. And then over time, I was just kind of like, all right. Just wasn't doing much for me. I don't know if I ever hated it, but I definitely like, as you don't, if I cared more for it than that, I'm pretty sure I would have watched it in the last 10 years.
Sure, yeah.
But,
well, I'm so excited for this month.
Yeah.
I'm glad whoever decided we should be doing Terminator movies. It was a great decision because I love this franchise. I'm excited to talk about it. Andrew, what do you think the over under is on how many bad Arnold impressions you and I are going to do throughout these episodes?
I'm guessing at least 20.
20. And how many good Arnold impressions are we going to do?
0.
We'll see how well that ages, but let's set the stage here for the movie we're talking about today. Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, released July 2nd of 2003, made on a budget of $187 million. That is a very large budget, one of the most expensive movies ever made at the time. At the box office, it brings in $433 million, enough to be called a success, but with that large budget, not exactly raking in the profits. Critically, it's honestly pretty well received. It holds a 69%, a very nice score, if you will, but that is firmly in the positive camp, so critics were on board. However, audiences, and especially amongst the Terminator fan base, it doesn't have a great reception. Even to this day, it's got its defenders. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But no one's come around and been like, you know what? It's actually a great trilogy. You could watch all 3 movies. It holds a 46% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. We've mentioned it's rare for the audience to be lower than the critic score, but that's over 20% lower. That's a pretty big drop off.
Yeah, and this is 69% off 206 reviews.
Nice.
So this is not a very, very nice. If only it had been 420 reviews total. Double nice. But
we're this close to greatness.
So close. We were only 214 reviews away, folks. Yeah, so I remember feeling like the critic score on this was actually pretty decent. But I knew the audience score wasn't great, and I knew that overall the audience reception generally was pretty poor. I will say, I do know a guy who enjoys this movie more than Terminator 2.
Interesting.
Not even joking. He legitimately believes that Terminator 3 is superior to Terminator 2. And we're going to not mention that again for the rest of these episodes. But yeah, the audience score is a little, like I said, it's much more mixed. It feels like the general consensus is it's basically T2 with more steps. There's a lot of rehashing. That was kind of the idea that a lot of fans were saying, and they don't really try to do anything kind of, I guess, paint by numbers is really kind of the best description or the nicest way I can put it. Fans just seem to feel like they didn't really add much. And so,
you know what's interesting about that, Andrew? To be contrarian to these, I'm not saying you're making up the criticism. I have heard that criticism, but what's funny about that is Terminator 2 is just Terminator 1. That is just it's like a high budget remake.
That is genuinely the guy who enjoys T3 more than T2. That's his argument. His argument is that T2 is a big budget T1 and T3 actually tries to do something different. And so when he puts it like that, it's like I turn into Falcon and I'm like, he's out of line, but he's correct. Like, it's like I follow through what he's saying.
Sure.
I don't necessarily agree with it, but I follow what he's saying.
Okay, there's some logic there, sure.
There's a logic. I don't know if I'll say it's a good logic, but I do agree with that overall statement, which is interesting because I do think this movie does try to do some things differently. But I think not having Cameron in the director's chair it means your action is going to be very different. Maybe a little bit more, I don't know, generic versus kind of the standout sequences that James Cameron is known for. And yeah, it generally people and we talked about this a little bit before, but like you're following Terminator 2. It's almost an impossible bar. Especially when you're removing James Cameron and people like that from the production. You're following one of the greatest action films of all time 12 years later. And that's a tough act to follow, but I think if you could move away from that a little bit, you can see there's actually some pretty cool stuff going on.
Let's take a look at this creative team. The movie is written by the writing duo of John Branco and Michael Ferris. Together, as collaborators, they have tons of credits to the name over their decades-long career. Before this movie, probably the most high-profile film they wrote being The Game. They wrote this movie, and the very next year, Andrew, they wrote Catwoman. So they are alums of the show. We've talked about them before. And they would not be done with the Terminator franchise. They do come back for Terminator Salvation, so we'll get a chance to talk about them some more on our very next episode. I couldn't find their collaboration is done. That's made very clear, like in their Wikipedia and their credits. They work on separate projects now. I was looking for the drama. I was looking for some kind of fallout or see what happened, but lips are sealed, it seems. So I don't know why they don't collaborate anymore. Maybe they're just retired, or one of them want to retire, maybe. But definitely together, a very successful career.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Also wrote the cyber thriller The Net in 1995. So these guys are all about that technology taking over the world, dangerous technology. Couple of some weird ones in there. Some comedies, some actions. A little all over the place. So good for them. But yeah, The Game. I mean, it's definitely a movie I've seen. It's a David Fincher, so you can't get much more high profile than that with him coming off of Seven. And couple of television shows here and there, and I think they wrote some episodes of The Simpsons or separately. And yeah, but apparently they were colleagues / had worked with our director before, and when he was brought on board, he wanted them to rewrite the existing script, but apparently did such a big job that they ended up getting the only final credit on the script, near as I can tell. There is a story credit to Teddy Serafian. But yeah, they did the final screenplay credit, which means they did a whole lot of heavy lifting on this final script.
You mentioned the director. It's directed by Jonathan Mostow. Another extensive, impressive filmography. Previously directed U-571 and would go on to re-team with the writing duo on the Bruce Willis film Surrogates, which I think is also like Evil Technology.
Yeah, it's based off a graphic novel of some kind. I remember when it came out, and Evil Technology. It's an easy thing. Sci-fi's been doing it for decades. Also, Jonathan Mostow, a writer in his own right to a degree, has a writing credit on U571 and on some of his earlier films, and then has a story credit on a few other things. But yeah, he's tasked with the rather arduous task of taking over the role of director from James Cameron, which is got to be daunting in a way. That's got to be a tough thing to try and follow up and try to sit there. But
yeah, just ask the director of Titanic 2. Here we go again. No one talks about that guy.
With due reason. But yeah, it is. It's always interesting to me when you have a situation like that where there's like this iconic film directed by an iconic director, and they do try to go back to it. And who ends up doing that? Something like Psycho 2 also comes to mind, where you've got this iconic horror film directed by arguably the greatest director of all time, and you have to kind of inhabit that space. And you've got returning cast. You know, we've mentioned, I think, Psycho 2 before, being an early example of a legacy sequel. But either way, it's not an easy thing to do. But I think in both cases, especially here 2 and Psycho 2, they come in and they find a way to put a spin on it. And I think ultimately you have a situation where the work they do, I don't know if I'd go as far as to say underrated, but I think it gets overlooked just because of what it's having to follow. It means people are looking at it with a much more critical eye than they otherwise might be, which, you know, it's a sequel to a movie. You're inevitably going to get compared to that film. You can't get away from that. But yeah, I think that does tend to allow their efforts here to go overlooked, and I'm glad we are taking the time to talk about it.
Well, let's do just that, Andrew. Let's talk about it. Let's dive into all the positives, everything we love about Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. Andrew, you ready?
Sure.
10 years after John Connor survived an attack from a Terminator, he finds himself once again hunted by a robot from the future. Like before, another Terminator is sent from the future to protect John, as well as the other targets on the list of the TX, the most advanced Terminator yet. The ally Terminator escorts John and Kate Brewster, who is destined to be John's wife and second in command of the human resistance, to the military headquarters of Skynet, where they will attempt to destroy it before it becomes self-aware. And Andrew, that's basically our plot. This is it's like one of those escort missions that you have in video games sometimes. That's the entire premise of this. It's a fun road trip romp with a robot father taking his 2 kids to a safe haven.
That's why I included on all my favorite road trip film lists. I think that it really doesn't get the credit it deserves within that genre. But yeah,
second only to Dumb and Dumber.
Yeah, I mean, with Road Trip right after it. There's it's short list, folks. Yeah, it's genuinely a pretty lean story. I mean, it's kind of, I think Roger Ebert's review even kind of says, he's like, it's one giant chase. That's really all it is.
Yeah.
But you know, so is Mad Max Fury Road. And it rules too. So I mean,
it leaves plenty of room for action, which is I think where this movie really shines.
Yeah, a simple plot. Again, you kind of talk about, you know, bringing up my not applicable to this film rant about ratings. Like, you know, a simple plot is never going to be why your movie is bad either. Like people say that they're like, oh well, the plot's so dumb, the plot's so simple. I was like, so like, who cares? Like, you know, you can take a simple plot. I've seen movies with simple plots that are great. I've seen movies with simple plots that are bad. I've seen movies with complicated plots that are good. And I've seen lots of movies with complicated plots that are bad. So it's by no means any indication of the film itself. And I think honestly, keeping it streamlined, focused, I think that's obviously I think a better move, especially in a situation like this where you're kind of having to kind of reintroduced Terminator to the public for the first time in over 10 years. Theatrically, I know that James Cameron did the ride in the mid-90s there, but it's just 12 years later. So if you're going to streamline and focus, I don't think it's a bad move.
All right, well, let's start with the cast of this film, starting with the high point, the best casting, best performance of the movie. Because every episode, we recognize one person who goes above and beyond the call of duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance, and we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, kick us off here. Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines?
So, a pretty lean cast, ultimately, at the end of the day, for a movie like this, and they're all a little bit like that. The cast, your group of characters in a Terminator film tends to be pretty limited. I mean, in the first one, it's basically just the three of them, for lack of a better word. It's Linda Hamilton, Michael Biehn, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. That's basically your cast of the first movie. The second one expands it a little bit, but still keeps it pretty tight. And this movie follows that trend. We've got John Connor, Kate Brewster, and then both the Terminators. Like, those are your main characters. So in that regard, I'm going to be going with one of our new characters that we were introduced into this film. I'm going with Claire Danes as Kate Brewster, John's former classmate, and future wife / second in command of the Resistance. Somebody like Nick Stahl does have a big ask, kind of coming into a character that already exists and has this kind of attachment. Arnold obviously is semi-reprising his role. Obviously, it's a different Terminator. But it may as well be reprising the role. But Claire Danes, you're having to come in as a new character into this universe, and that's sometimes a very difficult thing to do. And so the arc she kind of gets in this movie, I think is very interesting, because she starts off, she's just a normal person. She has no skin in any of this game. When things start happening, she's confused, she's angry. They basically kidnap her, and she's not having it. And
I mean, they straight up kidnap her. Yeah, it's exactly what they do.
They kidnap her, because they were protecting her. We're kidnapping you for your own good, which I think is what every kidnapper ever has said. But
it is also the backbone of the Terminator franchise.
Yeah, it's like we always kidnap people. But anyway, so over the course of this film, we kind of see her get introduced to these concepts, to these ideas, to this story and what's happening. And we find out that, like, her father is kind of a key to a lot of this, because he works for the company that kind of acquired Cyberdyne's assets. But you get to see her character kind of grow over the course of this film. And it's a very interesting arc that I like a lot. I think it adds a lot to the story. It kind of builds things out just a little bit by not just introducing us to a further age John Connor and kind of seeing where he's at, but starting to build out the people that are going to be around him when Judgment Day has happened. And we obviously get some interesting ripples to the future, where we find out that, things like the Terminator is programmed to listen to Kate this time, not John, because it's Kate that sent him back. And even the ripples we get within that. But we'll talk about that a little bit more with the scenes. But I think she's got a big ask in front of her to kind of start being a part of this world. I think she's up to that task in spades, giving a great performance as she kind of goes from normal person thrown into the deep end to kind of accepting her role in all of this, kind of culminating with her gunning down one of those prototype Terminator drones. It's pretty rad. So yeah, I'm going with Claire Danes as Kate Brewster. I think it's a great performance. I think the movie is better for it, and we're better for it.
Andrew, that is a great pick. I think she's definitely a standout in this cast. I really like this performance. And it may be a new character, but it's still kind of big shoes to fill, because the Terminator franchise at this point is really known for the quote-unquote strong female lead, or at least using a female lead in your action movie, which is then and still now against the norm.
It's literally the example anybody brings up ever when somebody tries to say women aren't portrayed well in film.
Well,
What
it's this and
about
Aliens.
Sarah Connor and Ellen Ripley? Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the big two for sure. But yeah,
there's two. That means there's no problem.
hashtag PP. Let's stay on track here. Point noted. But for that reason, the legacy that this franchise has, it's kind of a big deal to be the female lead. And she gets to kind of play both sides. Like Linda Hamilton in that first movie is very similar to her role here. She's getting introduced to everything. She's overwhelmed by it. And throughout the course kind of learns that she can fight back. And then T2, she's full on badass robot killer, right? And this one, she starts off kind of in the T1 Linda Hamilton role, but by the end, she's gunning down drones whenever they become self-aware, and she's kind of made that transition. So it's pretty cool that she can run the gamut and do it well. Her career has really taken off here. Definitely in a number of hits in the 90s, including the Romeo and Juliet movie that they made. Was in the Mod Squad in 99, which certainly was not a hit. But it's a movie that I always enjoyed. I think it's pretty fun. A remake of an old TV show alongside Giovanni Ribisi. So definitely really making a name for herself. And this is like her really obviously biggest Hollywood movie up to that point, with it being the franchise that it is and costing as much money as it does. And she more than rises to the occasion. Andrew, I think it's a good pick. I'm going somewhere else with the Mark Strong Award, but tons of respect for where you have chosen to go with it. But for me, there's just one answer. For me, the Mark Strong Award is going to Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator. At this point in the franchise, I just can't imagine a Terminator movie without Arnold. The franchise will experiment with that later on. We'll talk about it. But the story they're telling here with the Terminator going back to be a protector, it's got to be Arnold. He's literally the face of the franchise. And it's not for that reason alone I'm giving him the Mark Strong Award, but I think he's still just so good at it. It's funny, though. I do remember this movie coming out, and this is like kind of the first time you start hearing, like, well, Arnold, he's kind of old. He's still doing an action movie. He's still playing that character, which it's funny to look at him in this movie because he looks great. If only those people knew how much longer his career would go on and how much longer he'd be playing action stars. It's really like only recently, like I feel like his movie started to acknowledge his age. But in any case, yeah, I think he still looks great, still pulling it off. Speaking of Roger Ebert, you brought him up earlier. In his review of the first movie, he talks about how they really smartly plays to Arnold's strengths, and he doesn't use the word weaknesses, but it plays to the reality of Arnold Schwarzenegger, where he was a very young actor at the time, an experienced actor, but he's playing an emotionless robot. His voice an accent can seem jarring in certain roles, but again, being a robot, they can lean into it a little bit more. And I think that's totally right. I mean, it's a role that he was born to play. As long and prolific as his career is, this is still his most known role, most associated role with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and for great reason. He's great at it. I think at times he doesn't get enough credit for the comedy he gets out of it, just with his looks, or, he's got that dry delivery, but there's just enough in there to get a chuckle out of you at the most unexpected times. It's always a joy when that happens. So yeah, I'm still digging everything that he's doing as this character in this movie. I guess technically a different character from the last one, but it's Arnold as the Terminator. Yeah, so it's great. It's just, for me, it was a no-brainer. I had to give recognition to Arnold. Mark Strong Award winner, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I think this is a great pick. I do think you're right that there are times where people don't quite realize the talent that he has. And it's actually like kind of funny because like that first Terminator comes out in 1984. He does Conan the 2 years before that. Actually does the Conan sequel the same year Terminator comes out. And then that kind of starts because Commando in 1985, Predator in 1987, Running Man in 1987. But then he does Twins in 1988. And I always loved that there was a point where Arnold realized that that was something he wanted to do. And the story of Twins which is directed by a gentleman named Ivan Reitman, who made a little indie film called Ghostbusters. He apparently, Arnold met him somewhere, and Arnold was like, I could have been a Ghostbuster, because Arnold was like trying to show that he could be funny. And so that's kind of how Twins comes to be. It's Ivan Reitman being like, well, I can't really make you a Ghostbuster at this point, but I bet we could do something. And that kind of births into Twins, literally, in that case. See what I did there?
Very good. I acknowledge the joke, Andrew.
Very, very, very great, right? And then obviously that leads to stuff like then he does like Total Recall and Kindergarten Cop the same year. So at that point, he just starts doing both. He does these action movies and then just flips it and does a comedy the same year. And I love that. Did a bunch of stuff with Ivan Reitman, did a bunch of stuff with James Cameron. That's another thing people say that kind of separates people like Arnold Schwarzenegger from somebody like Dwayne Johnson, is that Arnold Schwarzenegger has these iconic performances with these relatively iconic directors, people like James Cameron and Ivan Reitman. This establishes him as this kind of elite person working with this top level talent in these pretty culturally significant films in many cases. And this movie does get lost in the shuffle because it's pretty late stage Arnold. I mean, this is post End of Days, 6th Day, Collateral Damage. This is when the Arnold returns are starting to diminish a little bit, as far as him kind of being a bankable action star, as was happening to all those guys at the time. I don't want to make it sound like this was limited to just Arnold, but the kind of big budget, bombastic action that these guys were known for was just kind of going out of style at the time. And but before that happens, and before he kicks into being the governor of California, he gets Terminator 3 in, which I think is cool, because it's something he wanted to do, and I'm glad that he was able to do it kind of fully dedicated, because even just a year or two later, he probably wouldn't have been able to do it because of being the governor of California. Now, we will discuss the idea of doing a Terminator without Arnold later in the month, but it is, I guess, easy, and I probably even said this not that long ago, for just to say Arnold is doing the same thing here, but you can't really discount what he brings to the franchise, and I'll admit that. There's this presence he brings to the franchise. I guess authenticity maybe is the question you want. Like, Arnold is there that makes it feel like it's a Terminator movie.
Yeah.
And it's a tough thing to overcome without him. Not necessarily impossible. But he does hold it together in a lot of ways. I don't want to go as far as to say you couldn't have done this movie without Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it would have been a big ask. You would have really had to make up for that in other ways to really compensate for not having him. And having him here helps hold the film together. It assists with all the other performances, and it just creates that connective thread through the films as well, because that's also something that these kind of late stage sequels kind of start to have issues with, is they're kind of sequels in name only. Like, you can tell me the story is continuing from the last film, but when nobody from the last film is there, and there's no connective threads, and we're kind of just doing our own thing, it can start feeling very disconnected. It can start feeling like, well, we're not actually a sequel, are we? We're just kind of doing our own thing. So by having Arnold here as a presence, it adds that authenticity. It continues that through line through these films. And yeah, there's an emotional core that he adds to it. That is important. So I think it's a great pick, Chris. Possible 2-time Mark Strong winner Arnold Schwarzenegger, possibly only one. But
we talked about him in Jingle All the Way, and I cannot at this time remember if we gave him a Mark Strong award. But regardless, he's a Mark Strong award winner and highly deserves it.
I agree. It is a very, very inspiring story that he has as far as coming to America and breaking into films and becoming one of the biggest action stars of the 80s and 90s. And you can kind of see this as the cap to that kind of era of Arnold. It really kind of is. He's got a cameo in The Rundown later this year or that same year. But otherwise, this is kind of his last big film until he's done being the governor. Certainly his last big budget starring role. So, I mean, it's for this, and then I think his next movie is outside cameos, Expendables 2 or The Last Stand, maybe 2012, 13. So there's a good almost 10 years that he sits out films, which, completely respect. You're the governor of a state. Can't go jetting off for 3 months to go make a movie. I completely agree with that. But I think this movie also does, like you said, serves as a nice cap to this era of Arnold.
I do love Arnold's story. I'm sure most people know it by now, but it is best told, in my opinion, by Bill Burr, who, to paraphrase, said, "How many lifetimes would it take you to go to another country, learn their language, get famous for lifting weights, star in their movies, marry into their royalty, and hold office?" One man accomplished all that, and it is really absurd when all his accomplishments are laid out in that way.
It really is. I'm guessing for me, at least 7.
At least. I'll agree with that for me as well. All right, Andrew, let's talk about Nick Stahl, who plays John Connor, a role made famous by Edward Furlong in the previous film, T2. According to Edward Furlong, there was a deal in place for him to return for this movie as John Connor. And Andrew, I would have loved to have seen that. Unfortunately, as most of us know, Edward Furlong was battling his own demons by that time. And again, according to him, once the producers realized the severity of his drug addiction, he was removed from the project, and kind of close to filming, they cast Nick Stahl. Edward Furlong is sober to this day, by all accounts, has been a few years sober, also overcame an eating disorder, so I'm very happy to see that he has seemingly tamed his demons, and I'm very happy for him. Nick Stahl, big shoes to fill. I mean, people love John Connor in T2, and as you said, coming into an established character, taking over that role, especially when it's the case here where the character ages up, so you gotta act the mannerisms that are already established, but age that up and add your own skills to it. It's a hard tightrope to walk, but I think Nick Stahl rises to the occasion. I think he believably looks like a John Connor. Maybe it's the dark circles under his eyes, but he
looks a little haggard there.
A little haggard. He's got that 5 o'clock shadow throughout the movie. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. It's kind of this character's story arc. I mean, he is on the run beginning of this movie because he wants nothing to do with this monumental task of saving all of humanity. And it takes some pushing before he finally rises to the occasion. But, he eventually does in the end. And that's his character story, told well by Nick Stahl. Does a great job. It's funny because personally, I know Nick Stahl for 2 things. This movie and Sin City, where Andrew, he plays a real bastard. And
he does.
That voice, it's hard to separate it sometimes whenever I hear him and not think of that yellow bastard.
Yeah, I mean, he's literally Yellow Bastard in Sin City. He is awful in that movie.
Great,
yeah, that's the other thing.
Awful.
Oh, fantastic. Don't misunderstand. Don't think he's bad at it. He's fantastic at it, but it makes me hate him. But yeah, like you said, a big ask here. And like you said, there's kind of several different takes on Edward Furlong being in this film. I think it, would have definitely added more authenticity if you want to look at it that way. But it ultimately didn't come to pass. I do believe it was talked about. The director, Mostow, he kind of made it sound like he really kind of wanted to go in a new direction, but I don't know if that's him kind of damage controlling, not using Furlong, or trying to kind of reframe it as less we kind of got rid of him versus I just wanted to go in a different direction. Whatever it is, ultimately doesn't get used, and Nick Stahl has to come in. And this is, like you said, it's a big ask. The chemistry between Arnold and Furlong in Terminator 2 is undeniable. The almost father-son relationship they have is a big key to that film. And having to kind of step into that is tough. Now, they do kind of get around a little bit of the Arnold situation by having this just be Arnold as a new Terminator. But so we don't have to quite pick up exactly with the same chemistry of the two. But I do agree. I think he's up to the task. He looks sufficiently haggard. He's basically got this PTSD, essentially, about what they did, even though he was a kid. He's basically kind of living in fear all the time that it's still going to happen, which proves to be correct, essentially. But like, he lives off the grid. He does like cash only jobs. Like, he's got no phone. He's got no address. Like, this is not a man that's okay. Like, he's clearly got some stuff that he's working through there, and he finds himself back in the thick of it. And it's a tough spot to inhabit, but like you said, I think he's up to the task. I think he does a good job, no less. I think he is, especially as he kind of goes on his arc, which is at the beginning very much wanting to kind of move beyond this, even though he really can't let himself. And just even one point in the movie, he says, I'm not a leader. I'm not the guy. He's like, I'm not, whoever you think that I am. It's not me. Then by the end of this film, kind of seeing him inhabit that role almost in real time. Because the big final scene of this, we'll talk about that more during the scenes, but there's kind of a moment that he has to flip the switch. And I think he's, like I said, I think he's up to the task. So not an easy place to be, but Nick Stahl doing a great job.
And then we have our villain of the piece. Christina Loken plays the TX. As I mentioned in that synopsis, the most advanced Terminator yet. And quick side note, Andrew, I just happened to notice this character described as, I don't even like this word, but I guess it's accurate. A gynoid? Andrew, that's a female robot.
Thanks, I hate it.
According to the quick Wikipedia dive I did here, android, although often used to be a genderless robot, the Greek prefix "and" refers to man in the masculine sense. So they made the word gynoid, which has been used since the 1979 editorial. I'll never use it again after this episode, but there it is. She plays a robot.
Yes.
She plays the Terminator. She plays the TX. Hashtag PP, another word I don't like to use is the Terminatrix. They dropped that line in this movie, and that might be the reasoning behind TX. But all right, back on track with the positivity. I like her performance here. She's doing a good job. And again, a very tall task, because you have Arnold playing one of the most famous movie roles of all time, right? The Terminator. And then just this last movie, Robert Patrick plays the T-1000, which is one of the all-time great villain roles. And so you've got these monumental robot performances, right? Action robot performances. And you've got to come in and have a new take. You're a new Terminator, different powers, obviously being a female design this time around. So very tall task. I think she's up to it. I don't think her or the movie are trying to be like, well, this is even better than the T-1000. It's just a different robot. And I think it's a smart way to go about it. Interesting career, gigs in modeling and still showing up in movies to this day. I mentioned, friend of the show, my wife, saw a brief scene in this movie. She did see the TX, and immediately, Andrew, she goes, oh, is that the girl that plays Blood Rain? And I was like,
What?
I was like, I don't know. How do you know that? And it turns out it is her. She recognized her from the Uwe Boll movie Blood Rain. So I guess
my God,
friend of the show, my wife, is one of the people on this planet that has seen that movie.
My God.
But yeah, that's her.
That's Man.
She walks that fine line where you've got to
wonderful.
Not show emotion because you're a robot, but show emotion and intent because you are an actor at the end of the day, and I think she does it well.
Yeah, I mean, she basically needs to be sufficiently threatening, and obviously I know that I'm sure there were people that were like, female Terminator, and I'm like, it's a robot, nobody cares, like, shut up. But, yeah, and, she's up to the task. She gets in on the action. She has several pretty cool fight scenes with Arnold where they're just smashing stuff up for a good amount of time, all the way to the end. These two are basically fighting off and on the entire movie, and I think it's really, really pretty cool. Like I said, they add some new quirks to this version. Obviously, the T-1000 was liquid metal, so he could form himself into like knives and blades and stuff and impersonate people. So we still have the impersonation. We still have the shifting and motion, the shifting and kind of making different weapons with their hands. But this one can do guns and lasers and flamethrowers and stuff. So, you could say it's just the T-1000 turned up to X, because in 2003 everything was extreme. But extreme. Yeah, I think she's up to the task. Silent. I don't think she says a single thing this whole movie. Not even getting a "Have you seen this boy?" But
interesting. Yeah, I didn't even realize that, but I think you might be right. I don't think we hear her voice.
I don't think she speaks the whole movie.
She speaks static into the cell phone, like to communicate with the machines. But
yeah,
and then of course the character speaks as Scott,
other
as the fiance.
People, yeah.
But yeah, I don't think we hear.
I don't think we ever see Loken herself actually speak. Which it's certainly Arnold in the first one and Robert Patrick in the second are not chatterboxes. I mean, they're not having extended conversations, but Robert Patrick definitely like asking people, "Have you seen this boy? Have you seen this?" And Arnold in the first one asking questions. I'll be back, setting up all his quips and one-liners. But it is. Yeah, it's just a new take on the evil Terminator, but I think it is sufficiently different and adds enough new layers that she manages to make it unique.
And Andrew, that's basically our cast. We have our two main humans, we have our two main robots. That's it. It is basically a road trip movie, so by nature, they're constantly moving from scene to scene, set piece to set piece, so we don't get a lot of screen time for just about anyone else. There's a few cameos and bit parts we can talk about as we dive into scenes, but I think it's time to do just that. Talk about the scenes of this film, starting with our personal favorites and when we think this movie is just firing on all cylinders. So, Andrew, start us off here. What is the best scene in Terminator 3 Rise of the Machine? I get tired of saying the subtitle every time. Does anybody actually call this Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines? Is that even like a appropriate subtitle, do you think?
I think it's appropriate in the sense that like this is where it all goes wrong and there's no way to stop it. Like I guess. Yeah, but like ultimately, when talking about Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, I think you really have to consider the artist's intent to have the movie be called Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. And if you're not going to call it Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, it's just really disrespectful to everybody who worked on Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines.
I mean, that's true. And this is about the same time that X2 X-Men United was released, and I always use that full title as well.
Yeah, X2 X-Men United is another great example, and you want to respect the artist's wishes. So Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. No, Chris, no one ever calls it Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines. But I call it T3 all the time, just because because T2, it's the last T3, it's like the last numbered film. They kind of they all start going with their subtitles.
That's true. There's been no more numbered films since this movie released in 2003. It's very weird that all of Hollywood just abandoned that concept.
Yeah, like everything needed a subtitle now, which means that they're out of order on my shelf, and it's terrible. I can't not put them in alphabetical order, folks, but then I also can't not put them in numerical order. But if they don't number them, then I what filing system takes precedence? I don't know. It's killing me, literally.
D3, The Mighty Ducks, is like not even on the same bookshelf as The Mighty Ducks. It's absurd.
It's not. It's terrible. It's absolutely absurd. Why is it called D2? Why is it called D3? I don't know, folks, but it's dumb. Fix it. Be better.
Anyway, what's the best scene in this movie, Andrew?
The best scene in this is the funeral shootout. Or the cemetery shootout. But no notes, Chris. Move on. But
All right, done.
no.
Cut. Print. Let's go.
No, I think this scene's just a blast, quite literally. I think there's just an interesting and fun little, not fun necessarily, but John's all
it's
freaking
fun.
out. That John's like freaking out, like so. He's got Kate and John at this point. Kate's a little still trying to get away and save herself, and this is the kind of a chance where she gets to do that. And they go to Sarah Connor's grave, and John is like, "Why would you bring me here? I don't, why? I don't understand why you do this." And Arnold kind of reveals, "Nah, fam. She was cremated in Mexico.
That's the slang they went with this one. It's hasta la vista and two, and this one it's nah, fam.
Nah, fam.
Your mom be bussin'."
Opens up this casket, and it's got tons of weapons in it, and it leads to that kind of, possibly the most iconic shot of this film, which is Arnold walking out of the mausoleum there with a giant casket on one shoulder with a machine gun in the other hand.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. If there's any iconic shot in this movie, it's Arnold carrying
the casket.
That casket. I don't know why. I don't know how much I've actually seen that, but yeah, that image definitely stuck in my brain. Maybe it was in the trailers and stuff. I don't know, but
I'm sure it was.
There's no denying it looks badass though.
It does. And that to me, and this is where we're getting, like I said, we get the interesting ripples that Sarah Connor is dead. She's not just been MIA. I don't know. I think they say it at this point that she's dead, but this is how we find out what happened, because there's been no Terminators since then. So you're kind of like, well, why wouldn't she be around? If there's no Terminators to be afraid of and there's nothing kind of coming, why isn't she still here? And they just reveal leukemia, because cancer is the worst. But we get some brief emotional moments there. We get some awesome action with Arnold. Like the guys are coming up to the door, and Arnold just smashes out through this stained glass window carrying this casket. And it's just awesome. It's awesome. It's rad. It's cool. Then we get a big extended shootout fight. We do get one of our fun cameos during this sequence, because Claire Danes does run out of the mausoleum at one point. I guess the mausoleum. I don't know, the crypt that they're in. And one of the people that she talks with after she runs to the cops is Dr. Peter Silberman, played by Earl Bowen. One of the few other actors to this point, possibly the only other actor besides Arnold that appeared in all three of these first films.
I think the only one, yeah.
He is in the police station in the first movie, I believe. He is part of the Psychiatric Institute in the second film. And he's just hanging out with the SWAT team here in the third film for some reason.
He what does he say? He specializes in basically PTSD,
crisis counseling or stuff like that.
Yeah. So he's a crisis, and he's like, "Is anybody here need counseling? I am available.
I'm here." But he mentions this kind of stuff takes a long time to get over, and he's speaking from his own experience there.
Yeah.
He's dealt with it twice now. Now 3 times. But just a fun, it's one of, like I said, it's one of our only other kind of legacy threads through all the films is him there. Something that kind of, as you go further into the films, kind of gets lost a little bit. But this scene is just a blast. It's fun. It's big action. A couple of cool ripples, some fun iconic shots. And for me, it's where it really, it's, you think about the Terminator films and people are like, it's kind of silly. And I'm like, there's some silly scenes in all of them. Arnold walking down the hallway with the box of roses, dropping them and stepping on the roses, revealing it's a gun. Objectively a little weird, but
guns and roses, awesome. Man.
I get it, Chris. I get it, but still, it's cool, even though it's a box of roses. So here they just move that box of roses into a box of guns and a casket, and it's pretty cool. So there's some cool action scenes in this. There's some cool
action scenes.
Action scenes.
It's cool action in this movie.
It's cool action scenes in this movie, man. Just turned into the spleen. There's some pretty cool action scenes all throughout this movie, but this is the one where I feel like it's really hitting for me. It's where I'm kind of having the most fun watching the movie, and it's great.
R.A.P. to Earl Bowen, passed away actually earlier this year, January of 2023, at the age of 81. But yeah, definitely a memorable performance in these first 3. And like I said, the real connective tissue other than Arnold holding together the first 3 movies. But this is a great pick for best scene, Andrew. It's definitely one of the highlights of the movie. I think I said earlier already, like this movie is at its best when it's got this kinetic action. And I love the visual of Arnold carrying the casket. I love, we get kind of some more looks at what the TX is capable of. After Kate runs away from the action, she meets up with her fiance, but as her fiance is walking toward her, his skin morphs and reforms as the TX. And then she gets taken out with a missile from Arnold, and it is awesome. Very cool looking stuff. And just while we're here, I don't want to skip over the way that she got to the cemetery is because she is posing as Kate's fiance, and on the drive there, while in the back seat, punches through the driver's chest. I guess this is an R-rated movie. Grabs the steering wheel and takes over. So whenever
when you put it like that,
whenever the TX is actually stepping out to go meet with Kate, Kate can tell something's off, and plain as day, clearly in the driver's seat is a dead guy, like leaning against the steering wheel. But yeah, good stuff, Andrew. I mean, I'm going with a different scene, but it's also an action scene. It's just kind of what I chose as my personal favorite action scene, but it's all good. There's a lot of variety to the action as well. The one that I am picking is the first big chase scene, vehicle chase scene.
Yeah.
Down the streets. This is whenever, again, learning about what the TX can do, they remote control a bunch of cars. They've got some nanotechnology abilities, and they can take over different machines and interface with a lot of different computers. And so the TX is commanding an entire fleet of vehicles chasing after John and Kate, which is just such a cool concept. See those cars and know that it's all like one hive mind controlling them. Arnold busts in and starts taking those cars out. I mean, we got a fire truck, we got a crane, we got some police cars, and they all get smashed. We talk about the budget of this movie, a huge chunk has to be going towards this scene. I definitely took note about how practical a lot of this stuff is. You can see there's a lot of real cars getting smashed. I mean, it's 2003. This is the era of Daredevil and it getting criticized for full body CG replacements. And there's definitely some CG in this movie used when necessary, but they are not afraid to stick to the practical stuff, as expensive as it may be. And I think it all just rules. I mean, the shot of Arnold like hanging on to the crane arm as it's perpendicular to the crane as it drives down the street is so cool. Flipping said crane by dropping the hook down into a manhole. Which that I think is one of the CG ones, but if it was Christopher Nolan, he would have demanded they flip a real crane in the middle of the street. But yeah, it's great. It's just a lot of fun. And
he would have demanded real robots. I don't know what you're talking about.
I mean, yeah, that's true. It's the first
to invent cyborgs.
Real big action set piece, and it makes you kind of think like even whatever you think this movie ultimately, if you see scenes like this, you've got to, I think, tip your hat to the movie. Like, well, nothing else. This action is still thrilling, and this still feels like Terminator. There's a great bit where I think it's Nick Stahl driving the car, and he's going through like a suburban neighborhood, and he's crashing through people's lawns, and he runs into this like inflatable ball pit that someone has in front of their lawns, and he hits it, and it like squeaks as he hits it and bounces through, and then like it lands in the street, goes like dome, and I'm watching that scene and I'm getting kicked out of these little sound effects, and my thought process, I'm kind of thinking about how most people don't consciously realize that the majority of what you hear in a movie is not captured on set. This is engineered and added afterwards. I think most people are aware that's true in animation, obviously, and people know about Foley artists, and you've probably seen videos of people watching the footage and bang a bunch of pots and pans to sync up. But it's basically the same thing with live action movies too. And even if you're aware of that, it's still easy to forget and not think about all the time. So that's what's on my mind, because I saw that squeaky thing and I knew someone had to come up with these squeaky sound effects to make it make sense. And almost immediately afterwards, we have in the same chase scene, the TX blow up the fire truck as soon as Arnold gets off of it. it explodes into this big fireball, and plain as day, Andrew, there's a panther roar in the fire. It just goes, "Roar." I was like, what?
What?
It's I mean, it works. Like, I'm not making fun of it, but like, that kind of stuff happens all the time, and most of the time we don't realize it. Like, I'm literally thinking about sound design as it happens, and so it stands out to me. But for the most part, this stuff we don't realize. Like, back on our Matrix month, we talked about the Burly Brawl, and there's a point where he throws a Smith into a bunch of other Smiths, they all fall over, and there's a bowling pin sound as they get knocked over. And it's not there for, like, comedy. It's just there because, like, our brain associates a bunch of things falling down with that sound. And so in the moment, it makes sense. And same thing with a roaring fire. Like, it just kind of makes sense to hear a panther roar. But when you isolate it and think about it, it's actually quite hilarious. So I really appreciated that panther roar moment. But yeah, this scene is just awesome. It's a very extended chase scene, but doesn't get boring, remains thrilling, got a lot of great moments, and it's what I'm picking as my favorite scene.
I think this is a great pick. This was in the running until I remembered the cemetery scene was in the movie.
Sure.
Just because, again, there's so much cool practical stuff. Like the crane, just like you said, like perpendicular, just crashing through light poles, electrical poles, telephone poles, everything, just causing genuine, like, practical damage. Like you said, that's something that they just wouldn't do it that way today. And I'm not saying that's bad, but this is definitely a movie that in moments like this is reminding me of a bygone era. There is definitely some CG in here. There's definitely some full body CG when it comes to certain things. I know there's certain things Arnold is not actually doing. But a lot of this chase scene is practical, and I'm always going to love that. I'm always going to love it when they do that, especially when it looks pretty good like it does here. So I think it's a great pick. I think it's a great chase scene. And it also is basically kind of our first big... we have a brief action scene at the vet before this, but this kind of segues into this chase. And that's a great way to kick off the action of this film, that kind of 1-2 punch. Kind of sets the tone that this really is what this movie is. We're not getting... we do twist the mythology at the end and add a couple of ripples, but it's a chase with big action involving Terminators, and that's kind of what the movie promises from the start and delivers on multiple times.
Andrew, let's just go ahead and talk about that final twist, right? We talk about this movie in any order we want. Yeah. We can do whatever the hell we want here.
Do what we want.
There are, I mentioned I saw this movie back in the day, wasn't a fan, but there's a few things that stood out to me, some positive, some negative. But I definitely remember that the positive that stood out is I like that twist at the end. This entire movie, they think they're going to stop Judgment Day again. Because the T-800 explains that he just postponed Judgment Day because John Connor is wondering how those demon Terminators coming back if they stopped it, and so he starts noticing some patterns of things playing out the same way, like meeting Kate. They had bumped into each other or made out with each other shortly before the events of T2, and so he thinks he's going to just stop Judgment Day again. So much so that, the final action set piece is them getting to the core of Skynet. The computers that host Skynet, the heart of Skynet, they're just going to blow it up. But when they finally get there, they see that it's just a fallout shelter. It's not the base of Skynet. And I love there's a bit of dated dialogue here, as he says, talking of Skynet, it already spread to millions of computers. It was software in cyberspace. And there was no heart.
Yeah.
You're expecting this one computer to be Skynet. And I don't know. I think it's a concept that most people today understand, but in 2003, they had to really use some buzzwords. Software in cyberspace just kind of stood out to me. But yeah, they realized there's no stopping Skynet. It's out there. It's going to happen. And he says very plainly, our destiny was never to stop Judgment Day. It was merely to survive it. So that's what's added to the mythology of Terminator. Whereas the end of T2, they seemingly stopped the horrific future. T3, we realize, nope, it's going to happen, but you've got to be alive to live on and fight there. And I like it. I like that twist. And even if, Terminator is an interesting franchise because at any point, even after that first movie, you can just like stop and have a complete story. So if you're gonna make a third one, I think you've got to add a twist or add something to the mythology, and this one does. And I personally am on board for it. I like it.
I agree. I think it is like you said, if you're gonna go back, I there's nothing more frustrating than when they go back and they do nothing new, where it's just, even if the story is not going to reinvent the wheel, bring new technologies to the table, bring new effects to the table, something like Top Gun Maverick, which just films the most impressive flight scenes and aircraft jet fights that you've ever seen. Even though the general story is not too far removed from the original Top Gun, just with the added age to it. But it's so made and so well
Maverick
done.
Is so good.
It's unbelievably
so
good. It's
good.
annoying. It's genuinely annoying how good it is.
I think, in my opinion, Top Gun 1 to 2 is the biggest leap in quality from a first entry to a second movie.
I agree. I completely agree. Anyway, but if you're gonna go back, bring something new to the table. Top Gun Maverick's a great example of bringing something new to the table, even if it's not necessarily within the narrative. But I think here the ending gives you that moment, because if somebody were like, I don't really dig this movie because it just feels like we're doing a lot of the stuff we did before, I wouldn't say it was a bad criticism. I wouldn't inherently say it was like off. I think it's a little vague, because like we've established, T1 to T2, there's a lot of similar DNA between those two movies. But overall, the ending of this is what I think establishes it as different and gives it that different twist. So now it's not so much that we're preventing Judgment Day, it's that Judgment Day was always going to happen. And this is simply about making sure that we're as best prepared as we can be when Judgment Day takes place. And I think it's a good twist on the mythology. I think it adds an interesting ripple that does somewhat play into the sequel they make 6 years after this, which we will talk about more next week. But it helps this movie stand apart and make it different than what came before. And for that, I respect it. And like you said, if you're going to keep going, and I mean, and in a way, the idea that Skynet is inevitable makes perfect sense. If it wasn't going to be Cyberdyne, it was going to be somebody else. And even if it wasn't these guys, it was going to be somebody else. Somebody was eventually going to build the AI that would essentially take over the world. That's the idea. And I think this movie puts a good twist on the end of it by basically setting up John. Like I said, this is the moment I'm talking about here. There's a moment where John's kind of running around this fallout shelter, and there's supplies, there's books, there's records, there's everything. Like, this is literally a shelter designed that, like, if humanity is gone, here's our stuff. And John's kind of incensed at first. He's upset. He's like, why would you send us here? I don't get it. I don't understand. There's no servers here. There's no system here. These computers are 30 years old. That's what he's saying. And then finally, like, in real time, him and Kate make the same realization that it was always going to happen. The key was not stopping it. The key was surviving. And this is how they survive. And I think it's a very well done flip. And then ultimately, because this place is all analog, despite the fact there's computers in it, how does that work?
You're watching the movie wrong, Andrew.
John starts getting calls, radio calls from people around the country that are trying to figure out what's going on. And the switch flips, and he realizes that he is the leader of this, and this is what he's going to do. And Kate is the one that's going to help him. And it's a cool moment. It's a big moment for the end of the movie. And I like it. I like it a lot.
There's also the revelation about John's death, which I think is a cool, fun ripple. And it's kind of funny because they're all in the RV together, and the T-800 is telling them about future events, and they're going to get married and everything and have kids. And they find out that the reason Kate is in charge, the reason she can give him demands, is because she's the one that sent him back. And when he asks why it wasn't him, he says that he was killed. And he starts to ask, he goes, well, how do I oh, never mind. It's best that I don't know. And then Kate says, well, how does he die? Like, as soon as he says he doesn't want to know.
Beautiful.
But he's killed by this very T-800 because the robots know that John Connor has an emotional attachment to this model because of the events of T2, and he uses that to their advantage to get close to him and kill him. Super cool concept. I really like that little ripple too.
I agree with that completely. I thought that was a really good flip. And then not just that they killed him, like I said, the idea that the Terminator they sent back is the one that killed him. So not just did they send the one that looked like Arnold to do it, that's this guy. We've just reprogrammed him to now get them to safety. And like you said, we're adding ripples to the mythology because the whole idea is like if John Connor dies, the whole thing falls apart. And here's a situation where John has died, and we're actually trying to, I don't know, circumvent that necessarily, but it is a cool revelation that, like you said, we're bringing new things to the table, and I'm always going to appreciate that, especially when it sort of fits in with the mythology.
We even see some of that connection play out. Was John's first in the car when John Connor's first in the car with the T-800. He's like, "Don't you remember me? Hasta la vista, baby." Like their connection. And he has to reveal that he's not the same T-800. And John asks him, do you guys just come off an assembly line or something? And he says, exactly.
Yeah. That's basically it.
That's some of that, humor. Like he's just plainly saying a line, but it's funny. And then, oh man, Arnold's funniest moment comes shortly after. They're driving this, vet truck, and they've got Kate in the back, and she's screaming at him, and John Connor is freaking out at one point because the T-800 pulls that core out of his chest and throws it out the window, and it explodes, and John Connor's freaking out. The T-800 says, relax, and then Kate starts screaming in the back, and he just looks back. She goes, let me out of here. He looks back, goes, relax, and like his eyes widen, like he's like demanding that she relaxes. His face as he delivered that was just
relax,
so good.
There's our first one.
What's funny though, Andrew, the humor of this movie. I was talking about there's a few things that stuck with me over the years, even though I watched it once. Some good, some bad. And hashtag PP, but like it's the comedy that stuck in my mind as a negative of this movie, which upon rewatch seems kind of silly. Because for one, comedy's always been part of this franchise.
Yep.
Kind of movies in general, even the biggest action movies. Christopher Nolan's about as serious of a director as there is, but there's still jokes throughout his movies. Same thing with T1 and T2 and T3. Now, the jokes that did stand out, the humor that did stand out, stick in my mind, like TX enhancing her breasts as the cop comes up, I still don't think that's really hashtag PP. I still don't find it funny, but it's not humor in general that made it bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That was kind of the impression. It's like, well, they just tried to be funny. They repeat Arnold, going to a bar to get his clothes, but now he gets it from a stripper and puts on silly glasses, and that's just not funny. And it's like that. Watching it back, I'm like, you know what? Actually, this is pretty funny. And that is the scene that friend of the show, my wife, saw, was him walk out of the bar. First him talking to the male stripper and telling the stripper to take his clothes off, and the stripper says, "Patience, honey." That is really funny. But she saw that and saw him walk out and put on those fabulous Elton John glasses, and she is like, "This movie is great. Like, why haven't we watched this?" And I was thinking, I was like, you know what? You're right. We probably should watch this. So yeah, again, a lot of what I didn't like about this movie kind of just it felt, I don't know, overblown in my mind, and I'm not suddenly reevaluating the movie and putting it on the same pedestal as the first two, but by all means, it's not some black mark on the franchise that needs to be forgotten about, at least, in this guy's opinion.
I agree. I also, that scene at the beginning is also responsible for our slight running gag throughout this film, which is Arnold continually doing "talk to the hand," but which he says at least a couple of times. But yeah, it, like you said, there's a lot of setup that plays by the same kind of rules. Like I said, they do the thing with Arnold going to the bar again, but like you said, we flip it. It's a strip club this time, and then you're kind of reminded throughout the whole film that Arnold is literally wearing a stripper's clothes. That, you know, is that stuff built to last? My understanding is it was designed to be like broken away, but I don't know. I'm watching
Yeah,
the movie
Velcro
wrong, but,
on clothes the whole movie.
yeah, like
That'd be
if it
great.
works, it works. But yeah, I think this movie is at bare minimum, it's good. It adds some new ripples to the franchise. It's building out the mythology in an interesting way. It's not content to just do a rehash, even though there is a lot of similar DNA. But as we established, it's a lot of similar DNA in those first two movies. So, yeah, by no means a black mark on the franchise. I think in a franchise that gets to the highs that T2 does, anything is going to struggle to live up to that. And when you make that comparison, almost anything's going to fall short. But this one's got a lot of really good stuff happening in it.
In fact, I think there's room for more comedy in this movie, Andrew. At one point, the T800 is talking about the list that the TX has, people she's going to take out. And on that list is Lieutenant General Robert Brewster, who Kate recognizes as her dad. And Kate says, she's going to kill my father? And John says, who is he? What does he do? Andrew, reword that. What he's asking is, who is your daddy and what does he do?
Who is your daddy and what does he do?
It was right there. Hey, that was a pretty good one, Andrew. I think that might go in the good category, the good Arnold impression category. Well done.
I watched Kindergarten Cop the other day, and I wondered if you could do a supercut of all the times in a movie Arnold has said some variation of, I'm a cop, you idiot, or I'm a police officer.
Arnold identifies himself.
But yeah, you're right. That was teed up right there, just plain as day.
I love it. Just gonna wrap some things up here. Some few notes that I took that I like about this movie. The TX. I mean, look, it's not about ranking, but nothing's ever going to top the T1000. I think because of the simplicity of it. It's a liquid metal. It can form stabbing weapons. Like, you immediately get it. It's got a cool look, that, Capri Sun commercial look of the shiny metal as he morphs. It's awesome. The TX, there's not that one line you can do to describe her. She's got the liquid metal on top. She's got a core underneath. She's got nanotechnology. She can interface with computers. We see it play out, and it's very cool. You just don't have that one line to sum it up. But every new ability they give her, I think, is really cool. Especially my favorite being taking over other machines of the time. Like I said, that fleet, driving that fleet of vehicles, I thought was just such a cool concept. But yeah, I really I like this Terminator, and it's I won't repeat the word I used. It's a robot. It's a female form robot, and they've got the joke that I maybe don't appreciate in the beginning. But other than that, they're not really leaning into the female robot as a form of comedy, which I think is cool. I think it just makes sense that some of the Terminators would be female if their goal is to infiltrate and blend in with humans, and this one happens to be. And they do a lot of cool stuff. Some of it is, like I said, very similar to T-1000, but whenever Arnold has her, like in a bear hug from behind, and she flips her legs and flips her arms and spins her head around and morphs to be facing him, like in 2 seconds, that's cool. Rad. That's just cool. That's just so cool.
Yeah, and I agree. I think they do find a lot of creative ways to use the TX. Like you said, it does make it a little bit more complicated just because you have to keep upping the ante. I think this is something they do a little bit better at with some of the sequels. But for what it's doing here, I think they make the most of it. And they make it, like I said, a unique character that's got some cool twists. And that one in particular, the kind of, I'm just going to, now I'm facing you. Ah, crap.
The last thing I want to get in here, Andrew, from my notes, is very important.
Okay.
Whenever Skynet goes online, when they hit the command to activate it, a person at the base says, "We're in." And that person is William O'Leary, who I know for playing Marty Taylor, who is Tim the Toolman Taylor's brother in Home Improvement, which
No
is a
kidding.
series I'm currently rewatching. He's got the one line, you see his profile, but I recognized him immediately. I was like, that's Tim's brother. And I don't know why I'm so proud of this. I don't know who I'm impressing, but I had
very
to get that
impressed.
in here. Thank
I'm
you.
very impressed. Because I probably, if I was paying more attention, would have recognized him, because that was one of those shows that was just on TV after school every day.
Sure.
But yeah, and also just saying we're in. You had to do it. You couldn't just leave it alone.
Dun 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 dun. That theme rules.
It does.
We
We
haven't-
don't use it in this movie until the credits.
I know, that's wild. Is it not even the opening credits? I don't think you hear it, which is crazy. But
Yep.
that will be in my head for the rest of this month. Man, I'm so excited to talk about the rest of these. I mean, one movie down. I've already greatly raised my opinion of it after revisiting. We got Terminator Salvation next week. I also haven't seen this one in a minute, but this is one of the ones that I've been a bit of a defender on. There's
have.
a lot I
I-
remember liking about this movie.
You have I have not gone and done it because life is pain, but you have told me more than once to go back and give Salvation a second shot, because I'm pretty sure I saw, well, we'll talk about it more next week, but I'm just attesting to the fact that you have gone to bat for Salvation. And I am excited to watch it for that reason. I bought it today, so I'm ready to go.
Nice. Well, we will dive into that next week, but for now, it's time for our question of the week. If you want to write in a question for a future episode of our show, you can. Just hop into our Discord. There's an invite right there in the show notes. You've got it. You've got it right in front of you. Just click on notes for this episode. I know like nobody does that. No one looks at the notes for podcasts, but there's some cool stuff in there, some cool links in there, including an invite to our Discord. And you can ask a question just like Mike Lynch did, who says, Andrew, I love this question. He asks, when did Leonardo DiCaprio first seem like a grown adult in movies to you? He didn't strike me that way until Inception at 36 years old. He always seemed like he was play acting being an adult. Andrew, I love this question because I agree with it 100%. Like,
Yeah.
He seemed so boyish for so long. I think even after he kind of started taking on older roles, I kind of agreed that I didn't like... I'm agreeing 100%. So this question really tickles me. But for Mike Lynch, it was Inception. Okay. So I have his filmography pulled up on my screen. We're going to look at this. We're going to try to pinpoint the moment he felt like he was playing a grown man. But Andrew, just anything pop out to you, top of your head?
Probably The Departed for me. That's the first one coming to mind. I know that was a few years before Inception. That was one where, like, by the time The Departed came out, I think he was into his 30s. I think he's born in 74. Departed
So I'm
76. So
I'm looking at right
32.
now. Yeah, born in 74. Okay.
So yeah, 2006 he'd be 32. So Departed and Blood Diamond are the same year. Yeah, The Departed was jumping out at me. I definitely wasn't. He didn't seem like he was play acting an adult in The Departed to me, just because Departed's really good.
Interesting. All right, so I'm looking at his filmography here. Now, obviously, through much of the 90s, he is kind of playing up the boyish features like Titanic.
Yes. Romeo and
even
Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet. But, like, I feel like the Man in the Iron Mask, he's supposed to be basically in his 20s, but a grown man. I don't think he's supposed to be boyish about that, but he still has that look to me. I gotta rewatch that movie. I used to watch that all the time. The Beach. Let's see. I mean, Catch Me If You Can. He's obviously...
To be
Again.
fair to the character he plays in The Man in the Iron Mask, he plays King Louis XIV, who took the throne when he was 11. So I don't.
Okay,
know,
but he's
I don't
not
remember
playing
at what
11
point-
years old.
I know, but I
so-
don't know at what point that movie is in King
Okay.
Louis's reign. So he may actually be supposed to be playing somebody much younger.
Fair enough. Catch Me If You Can is 2002. He's 28, but definitely
He still feels kind of boyish
18.
to me. in
Yeah,
that.
exactly. And I think he is playing down a little bit, but it works for him. Now, Andrew, Gangs of New York comes out the same year.
Yes.
And I, to this day, have not seen Gangs of New York. But when I saw the trailer for that movie, my thought was not necessarily, oh, he seems like a man now, but I was like, oh, he's finally trying to be an adult. That feels like he's finally, we're supposed to view him as an adult. Like I said, Catch Me If You Can's the same year, but he's obviously playing young, Titanic. I mean, 2002 really was like the relaunch of his career after a few kind of duds and light work, but I can't say that I watched. Like I said, I've never seen the movie, so I can't say that's the one where I thought he was an adult. Even The Aviator, I saw that one. He's playing Howard Hughes, supposed to be an adult. He still feels boyish to me, but The Departed, I might be agreeing with you. 2006. I think by that point, there's not any scene where I'm like, you seem kind of young for that. And he's in his 30s.
It's wild to think about.
We're just off to rate. Yeah, anything after that, Shutter Island. Yeah, at this point, I think he's playing an adult pretty well. But yeah,
I mean, he's almost 50. He better be
into his 30s. I gotta say, in the Question of the Week channel, this question was asked, and then Cody hops in and says, "Is that why he only dates sub 25-year-old women?"
Oof. I mean,
folks. Wolf directed at Leonardo DiCaprio. To be fair,
oh yes, yes. To be clear,
that is a very gross thing. Anytime you have to say it's technically not illegal, it's nothing good follows after that. But I just thought that was
folks. Oh no, our fans don't understand that reference. Sorry,
Andrew. When have you ever shied away from making a wrestling reference?
Folks, where's the lie?
There it is. There it is.
Yeah.
So,
my God,
Mike Lynch, thank you so much for that question.
The best jokes are rooted in the truth.
Specific of a question, but I think a lot of people immediately get what you're saying there. So our answer is The Departed. Yeah, a few years before Inception, but he's well into his 30s before people are looking at him like an adult. I guess not the worst problem to have.
No.
Yeah. No. Good for you, I guess, in your looks. But I will end my praise of Leonardo right there. What about you? You got anything else? Anybody else think Leonardo seemed like a man earlier than The Departed? Or maybe you still can't take him seriously as a grown adult? Would love to hear about it. Hop into that Discord and let us know. And until next time, just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can check him out on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. And thanks to Mitch for the music. You can follow him on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy. And check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.
Got to be daunting in a way. That's got to be a tough thing to try and follow up and try to sit there. But
just ask the director of Terminator 2. Here we go again. No one talks about that guy.
No one. We're so funny, folks. But yeah, like I said, not an easy task to take over, but he comes in, and like I said, he tries to leave his stamp on the franchise, and I think he does a much...
Damn it, I ruined my own joke. I just realized it playing in my head. Titanic 2, here we go again, is what the joke was supposed to be. I said Terminator 2.
I was like, Cameron directed Terminator 2, you dummy.
Look, magic of editing.
Yeah.
Yeah, just ask the director of Titanic 2. Here we go again.